Okay, team. Sorry. I had some bad jokes, but I'm not going to say them. All right, so let's see. So next week, I have the enjoyable task of sitting through 2 10-hour days of dean interviews at airport interviews. So I think there might be no assignment. That means there'll be no assignment for you. How about that? Per popular request. So there won't be office hours on Wednesday. I will escape to teach because I want to do that, and it means I get to escape. It is actually my job. So I think it trumps talking to people in a room, 9 of whom will absolutely not ever be seen again. So, really painful. Never run a search committee, people. All right. What else? Okay, so it's contagion things. So we have a little more on biological contagion. So I've given you the very basics of how this works, and I want to, what we've done a lot in this class. Just sort of move away from some simple stories and see what happens to, what happens to the game as you do that. And is there universality? Is there some sort of, how stable are these theories and models? What happens if you add a few simple, realistic pieces to them? Right? And generally, when we're making up theoretical models, we like what's inspired by reality, but in no way applicable to. That's usually how people in the theory world like to live. But I'm interested in reality. So, so this number will appear. So we're about 2/3 of the way through the course. So I want to put this up. After this lecture, we'll be there. So this guy's going to be a bit of a fighter later on, but it's going to have some trouble. Okay, 2/3. 2/3 is a champion. All right. It's a good physical fraction. Okay, let's see. Come back to that guy. So this is Iceland. We're going to talk about Iceland. So Iceland also is a nice petri dish for diseases. It also is where what I would call aluminium comes from. That possibly hurts you. Also fish, of course. It used to have investment banking options, but they went back to fishing, I believe, is what kind of happened, right? It's like, put the fishing basket down, run a bank, let's go back to the fishing. All right, Iceland, which really is covered in ice. Okay, right, social contagion is next. We are here. Good. So the thing I introduced you to you the other day was this idea of R0, the reproduction number, this quantity. And so what we tend to do, mathematical epidemiology, but also real world, concerns about diseases, we want to get a handle on this number. And if we can modify it in some way, if we can dial this thing by vaccinations, by quarantine, by restructuring transportation, given an outbreak, and we can get it to go below 1, then we have this idea that the thing will not take off, right? So it's a very simple story. If it's greater than 1, we have an exponential takeoff. It, of course, comes from these, what I would call random mixing models, right? So everyone is bumping into everyone in this big soup, which is pretty unrealistic. But we've taken it a long way. We want to define this system story with 1 number. Always a bad plan, right? We talked about having a plane with 1 number. Not good. Okay. So R0, for example, just to recapitulate a little bit, was about the same for all of these. Very different outcomes in terms of the final state. So there's obviously some, at least, randomness involved. What I'm going to say is you don't want to, of course, just use 1 number to quantify any of these things. So we've talked about size distributions a lot. So we know about them. We've talked about them very generally, I suppose, but earthquakes, cities, all these things, forest fires, war fatalities, lots of arguments about whether they're really power laws or things like log normals or stretched exponentials, all sorts of things. But they're heavy-tailed distributions, right? They are all distributions of surprise. Wealth distributions, popularity, of course, epidemics. So in some ways, yeah, right. So I call them pyramid schemes might be what these things are, right? They're just naturally occurring pyramid schemes, which we don't like if someone makes it up, but if it arrives organically through natural processes, that's kind of cool, right? That's okay, until we realize it's a pyramid scheme. Nature is beautiful. All right, so except for all the evil things it makes. So let's see. So as I said, power laws often, but not always. So what about epidemics? Well, it just hasn't been something people have thought about. And the data's not quite as good as it is for some of these other phenomena. I mean, some these things we got a handle on pretty early. We can measure how big they are. It's very hard still, and California, for example, is now trying to instrument itself essentially so that you can have warnings, which places like Japan and Mexico, I believe, have done quite well. So, you know, you can't predict it's going to happen 2 days from now, but you can say, well, there is one happening 500 miles away, so you should run outside, right? That's very useful. Tsunami warnings are the same sort of thing. So we've got, you know, we understand these things so that we can cope with them. All right, so Iceland turns out to be a great little place to study diseases, and also a good place to go if you want aluminium, and fish, and nice colored houses. Okay. So this is going back to 1890. So you see this is good data, right? This is good data. And it's the population has been pretty stable. It's about 400,000 or 500,000 people now. It's not huge. Of course, these diseases that reach Iceland have to have come by boat and eventually plane. They're injected from the outside. So this is for measles. And these are counts. They have counts that they did a good job. So it's on a monthly. Right, so this data is on a monthly scale, regions, and it's also regional as well. So there's quite a rich data set. But doctors would report in their, you know, how many people they saw with whatever it was. There's rubella. There's what else is in here? Whooping cough, pertussis. Right, these are things that we fantastically figured out how to get rid of, right, with vaccines, and we inject our kids with them. And then we sort of stopped doing it a little bit more recently, and then whooping cough pops up again. So, you know, these are really awful things that people suffered from. And you can see the end of measles really dying away here. But all of these you can think of as relatively new outbreaks. So we have this kind of, there's an exogenous shock to the system. Someone comes in and has some horrible thing, and it starts to spread through the population. So we can treat them as, so this is our world now, and this is SARS, right? So something is starting off, right? So starting off again in Iceland. So we can look at these distributions. So there are a couple of other places that have good data. Faroe Islands is much smaller, produces some of the strongest men in the world. You know, those things on ESPN2, but which is always fun to watch. So does Iceland, of course. I don't know why that is, but you know, you're on an island. Things to move around. Let's see. Large chunks of ice. All right, so this is pretty good data. So let's see, there's also, as I said, so there's rubella or German measles. The flu is a bit trickier because it kind of bleeds into itself. It's just so common. It's hard to see separate outbreaks. All right, so pertussis is whooping cough, German measles, rubella, and good old standard measles. So these are very funny distribution. So these are actually on normal scales, right? There are no log-log sneakiness things here. This is just a normal scale. So this is the fraction of the population infected. And so you have the actual population as a function of time as well. So you can normalize it as you know, according to the population of the outbreak. And so if you see these little gaps here, which took like 40 hours of MATLAB to make, as I recall. It's kind of ridiculous. Anyway, these little guys here, that's a 75, that's a 5, right? So there's a big spike for small outbreaks. There are lots of little outbreaks that never took off. So lots of really small ones. So we see that with power law distributions, but it turns out to then have this kind of flat kind of distribution. So this is a rather unusual thing. I mean, it's a small data set, still pretty rich for, you know, compared to what else we have. And so again, 75 here, 105, these are big spikes around a very small size, right? Of course, it's been binned in some funny way. If it takes off, you know, if this is a relatively uniform distribution, right? These are sort of spikes, and it's 0.1, 0.06, 0.075. There are different limits to it. But these are roughly, you know, this kind of distribution. Either when it takes off, you get a bit of a spike like this, sort of a delta function here, or it's pretty flat, super flat. All right, well, we can look at this in various ways, and we like to look at the complementary cumulative distribution. It doesn't say, but that's what this is. This little, it doesn't say in the previous, well, maybe we use this, but it's n, the little greater sign, that's in there, right? So these are the same slides as before. This is for pertussis, this is for measles. And so there's an effort in here, so we make the complementary cumulative, which we know is nice, there's a smoothing and so on. These are fits to it. You can see it's really flat, right? That's really flat. Now these are on log scales, many orders of magnitude, so there's 4 orders of magnitude, so we have some chance of finding a power law if it's there. Same story here, but again, pretty flat. And maybe there are these sort of 2 regimes. I mean, this is just being incredibly optimistic and saying everything is power laws, we will find them, right? Which we will do. So we madly try to find one, right? So we try because we're desperately sure that that's the way the world works. And we wear funny hats that say things about power laws, and we have a whole, religion built around it. So we ignore this slide later on because it can't be true. So if they're really complementary cumulative distributions, then it's minus gamma plus 1. That's our little exponent story, right? So the psi has become the, for no good reason, has become the size of the outbreak. So there's very limited scaling with a possible, it's on the next slide, but there's a very limited scaling with this kind of possible break-in scaling. So I'll show you what the values are for these 2. They're pretty pathetic. So gamma could be 1.4 for low disease size, outbreak sizes, 1.13, which is absurd, right? This is really getting to an extreme case. Pretty similar for pertussis as well. So this is, we've really tried to find our power law. We've been very optimistic. And there are other ways you can fit it and show that the distribution doesn't match. But we like these kinds of things. We expect this kind of stuff for real systems quite often. Obviously, when gamma is less than 1, we can't normalize, so that's really bad. So we're getting to a very, very odd thing. So as I said, the distribution is quite flat. Doesn't really seem to have a power law story for it. So that's Iceland. So now let's look at SARS. So this is a, right, this is just one outbreak of this overall. But there is a terrific data set that we have. I mean, it's a bit tricky because China wasn't very good at reporting how many people had died. I mean, there's also just undercounting and so on, but I think that was just, we're not telling you anything. So that's a little bit of a problem. But at least these are cases that were known. This is from a paper that appeared in Science, or at least the data came through that background. I think I plotted this. Yes, I did. Right. So you see this resurgence, right? So you think, oh, okay, like you're here, you're watching, you're in charge of the world with your white cat and your swivel chair, and either you want the thing to take off and you're disappointed here, or you're just trying to keep the masses down, and so you feel like you've done the right job, right? Right. So then the thing goes out of control though, because it goes boing. There's a huge spike here. There's another. So you really, if you're at this point, you're governing the world, you're a little worried about it. Of course, if you're a normal person running around, worried about people coughing on you, you're terrified, right? So this is really bad. So this is a nasty, like zombie, monster won't die kind of situation. We call it resurgence, but it could be probably called something scarier, because that's pretty bad. So epidemic slows. One thing we can think about here is the infective is moving into a new, this is sort of the story, right? Especially with SARS. We have people flying around the world on planes. They go and sneeze on their fellow people in the magic tubes. And they, with the flappy, no, they don't flap, the wing things. And land in a new city and go and do various things, coughing on other people, and bad things happen, right? So apparently there are a few stories. So there was a truck driver who moved from somewhere to somewhere in Hong Kong, and, spread it through a market. There was a fellow who ended up in a Hong Kong hospital, and so everyone's fascinated by what's going on with this person. So they're all all over this guy. So everyone gets sick. So that hospital is closed down and quarantined, and no one's allowed to leave. So we responded pretty severely, just like the movies, I suppose. Scenario B sort of situation. Okay, so you have these new pools of susceptibles. So this is not random mixing. You might, big surprise, right? The world is not a random mixing situation, right? And I tell you seriously, so one of these science papers absolutely modeled it in that way. Okay, so it's not. Big observation. There was a recent science paper that had at the end of its abstract looking at diurnal rhythms based on Twitter that people, so something like it suggests that people wake up later on the weekends. That's really what the abstract said. Okay, so well done, scientists. Yes, we will continue to fund you. Just like pull the plug. Okay, so so there's this idea then of having, of course, pools of people in some network story. But how do, we want to get a toy model that kind of captures this a little bit and gives us some sense of how bad this is and how we could respond to it. Of course, there's the practical real world, and I'll talk about it. Some of the big models we have now, which have really only appeared in the last 10 years. But these rare events, right, could be the bad things that are controlling the outcome for these kinds of spreading events. And so this is not just about diseases then, but you could imagine bad things happening in ecologies, right? I mean, species and so on, things moving around. These little accidents and so on can really give rise to big changes, right? This fragility of the fragility story. All right, so that's a scary looking thing. So we have this funny distribution, and we have this resurgence story. So they're not at all explained with our simple models. So let's look at some more models. And we want to get at this. So we'd like these broad epidemic distributions, which is really unpredictability, right? So if it takes off into here, it's like, we're in trouble. Put the bunker thing down and bring out all the cans of food you have in the basement. I don't know what else you put in there, but you definitely want some food. So let's see. So broad epidemic distributions, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, all 7 seasons. That would be good. And a generator. Let's see. So resurgence is this other issue as well. So what do you need to do to get that? How is this just something that comes from a super, super complicated model, or can we get a little bit of that coming out of simple toy models? So this is from a very basic kind of model. This is one of the ones where we have a network. So there are discrete individuals in the network, right? I mean, it's just structured like that. We have, as I showed you, the differential equation story where there's no separate individuals. There's just sort of a fraction of the population that's infected in fractions. And because we sort of think of those as having infinite populations, we in fact really turn on epsilon at the start, which is some subset, which is an infinite subset. It's a bit strange. Anyway, here we can just infect one person and then see what happens as it spreads through the network. And we'll have more of that in the social contagion stuff. What happens universally in these kinds of stories is either it fails, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 people get infected to start with, and then it's gone, right, just through stochastic failure. Or if it takes off, once it gets going, these models have this kind of lots of branching structure, so once it gets going, it's a runaway story, and you're in a lot of trouble. So this is for a case where the reproduction number is 3, right, R0, and so typically 1 infected will get 3 more individuals infected. So it could just make a mess and fail at the start. But if it does take off, really almost everyone gets infected, right? This is the fraction here is 1. Almost everyone gets infected in this model. So that's bad. But it's bimodal, hugely bimodal. And in fact, as I talked about with the differential equation type models, if you start the thing, it always takes off and it always goes to exactly the same fraction because we have an exact solution for those models. So it's unimodal. It's just boom, always takes off. So it's not just these. It's not just differential equation models. It's also networks. It's also all sorts of network models. These random ones. We'll come to scale-free ones later on because they're, as you might imagine, as I've talked about a little bit, these things are very good for spreading things. But so are small world ones because there are these random hops now and then. There are a couple of exceptions, right? So there are a couple of exceptions. This is going to be pretty weird. Forest fire models. Very abstract, weird forest fire models which have a flavor of Ising type model things. So what we've looked at a little bit with the hot model. So those guys. And then some of these very, very sophisticated, everything goes in kitchen. You're really trying to model how people move around, the whole thing. You can get some of that as well. So I'll mention some of those. So the forest fire models need to be addressed. So there's a paper from '96 in Nature, so it's Rhodes and Anderson. Anderson May have written a lot of stuff about diseases. Robert May, Sir Robert Lord May, who's an Australian, become sort of, I don't know what he is. Maybe he's Mr. again. He's gone up through everything you could imagine, right? He was the science advisor to the UK government, definitely a lord of some sort. Anyway, so these guys were at Oxford, where they're very smart. So, right, if it works for magnets, it'll work for people, right? So this is you know, I should impart this. I mean, coming from that background, I don't mind saying this. So it's a bit of an odd thing. So we think of epidemics now as forest fires. They're going to explore spreading on all of these higher dimensional lattices. This is a bit strange. So 3D ones, 5D ones, because they turn out to have similar power laws. Now, as I showed you before, these things don't really look like power laws. You can bend them very, very cleverly so that they kind of do. But you know, and I'm not going to go into it in a great deal. But basically, yeah, they have data from Iceland, as we've looked at, and the Faroe Islands claim that they have power law distributions. So then they're just going to map this kind of model that's sort of really for magnets and so on, which was used for forests. It's also, you know, a completely fun toy model for magnets in the first place. It's not, right? Use it for forests, which is fun, and then we're going to use it for diseases. So even the original forest fire model is still not, well, I mean, there are some funny things about it. It's not completely understood, some of the original ones. Okay, tricky. So you see, this is, again, so this is for 2 different diseases. It's not labeled. So this is, you know, what the kind of time series I showed you before. And here's their cumulative distributions. But you can see they've really bended into 4 things. And very naughty things can happen when you do that, right? You've got to be very careful about binning in log space. So it looks like a flat line. But these are to be compared directly to the things that I showed you before, which had a much more refined bending in it. So it's lost that structure that was here, right? This would be that kind of structure here that's all ironed out, right? The one I showed you before kind of had this sort of structure. That's all been turned into a straight line. Eek. All right. So we're going to say that's wrong. All right. And bad things will happen to me because those people are important. Let's see. So lots of other people have talked about multi-scale models, saying, all right, let's lift out of this this idea of random mixing. Obviously, that's wrong. So how do we kind of move away? So people love analytic work. So there's a bit of being stuck in that framework, right? We need to be able to solve it mathematically. Otherwise, it's not true or something, which is a bit of a disaster. There's work by Longini where we have 2 scales. So there's at least a mixing locally, and then people mix globally in some ways. So it's a bit like the small world story, right? There's very local interactions and then moving out. So that gives you some extra stuff. The first big, I think the first really big, you know, kitchen sink type modeling was what's called EpiSims. This is Eubank, who was at Los Alamos, and their team. So they have, so they did things like they'd have data for, say, Portland and I think Chicago and Los Angeles, various other places. So you have census data. So you set up your city, drop in a disease, let people go about their daily lives. You know, they drop the kids off at daycare, they run a whole kind of world and see how it spreads, right? And then have some stories about this. So this is a paper that appeared in Nature. You know, I've said this at the start, I suppose, but all of these slides, you know, if there's something that you want to come back to later on, there's all this stuff you can drill into, right? So there's a deeper thing, usually hidden in some of these. So that's a Nature paper here. Vittoria Kolitsa did, and various others, including Vespignani, did some very nice work looking then at airlines, right? So this is at a city scale, this is at the world scale, just getting the data on where planes go, right? And we're super connected. Sort of the upshot of this is we're toast, right? We're in a lot of trouble. If something spreads and no one, you know, and the thing is sneaky, it's a sneaky disease, and it just hides and waits till it's spread to a lot of people, and then says, you know, pops out of your stomach, you know, and it's like Kermit the Frog pops out or whatever. That is from an old Mad magazine that I read when I was a kid. I never saw movies, but I saw, I think Conehead the Barbiturates was my introduction to Conan the Barbarian. It was the Mad version. It's like 2 years where I read these comics. It's sort of confessional, right? It's okay now. All right, so, yeah, but the Alien had Kermit the Frog popping out of the captain's, right, yeah. Which didn't make a lot of sense to me. All right, so, yeah, Sigourney Weaver, very good, well played. So, Gleam. So this is a global pandemic simulation and by Alessandro Vespagnani and his team. He's at Northeastern now. Maybe this is a hard thing to see, but you can download this guy and run it, right? So you can drop a horrible disease into your favorite city, or your favorite, your non-favorite city, and see if you can destroy the world, right? So this is perfect for the swivel chair set. Okay. But right, so they're doing the right thing. They're trying to make this thing work. It's hard because you've got all these horrible things you have to put into it, but they're really using real data, census data, airlines, local traffic. You have to think about how, see, there are equations. There's an equation. You have to think about how people react, of course, right? And so then you try to institute natural behaviors in terms of quarantine and blocking travel and so on. But we know, it seems pretty clear that if we really have something take off and we really block travel, we're in a lot, we might save ourselves, but we'll sort of have a pretty big economic disaster as well. So best to wear the funny little masks. Okay. They come in lots of cute patterns now, I have to say. Right. It's in Japan a few years ago. All right, so this is incredibly important. This has to be done. We have to put tons of money into those things, make those simulations work. I know even just the transportation ones, getting cars and people to move around in cities and just seeing what, disease aside, just sort of trying to model traffic, really, really super, super hard. It's super hard. And there are lots of horrible details in those models. There was one that I know, someone was telling me about how they were trying to get this thing to run, and it turned out that you had cars in there, they had some sort of arbitrary setting on their ability to drive out into traffic, right? So they have to have kind of a gumption level. Like how crazy are they? Are they really careful and cautious and wait until there's a long way, or are they insane, right? So there's some dial, there's some parameter in this thing. Not everyone has the same behavior. Like how close will they be to other cars? Right? You're running this thing. And so it turned out the thing just wouldn't work because there were enough of them that just got scared and got stuck at things. So they had to basically artificially put another floor on that thing, just move it up and make them a little bit braver. But there's no empirical, there's some empirical work there, but a lot of these little heuristics that you put in, they're kind of reasonable, but they're still toy model kind of heuristics. Yeah. All right. Okay, so all right, so let's do this. So we're going to create a simple model. This is work that we did back at Columbia. I'm going to tell you about our piece because it fits in well with this whole business, but it's kind of stuff that gets to the edge of what you can do with a simple model, right? And so there's this question floating around in all of this: what's n? Is it the scale? Is it the world if something takes off? Is it a region of the U.S.? Is it Hong Kong? So Hong Kong's a good example. Do we think about it as being a neighborhood? What is it? How is it spreading? Or is it Asia? When we have these simple models, there's an n. Often we're dealing in fractions, right? We'll say, a third of the population was infected, but what's that population? So, and it's true that in these simple models, if we want to kind of fit them to the data, we basically have to see how the thing took off. So you can easily fit a model if it does this versus this. Then after the fact, you say, well, n was whatever it was, right? Okay, this is Asia, this is Hong Kong. And you just fit it. There's no sense that the model is telling you what's possible. All right. So here's a toy model. You've seen these kinds of pictures before, or exactly these things. So right, we have this idea of individuals moving around in context, so this worked well for the small world one. We'll do a slightly different thing here. People have these attributes, yes. I'm going to skip through this. But this idea of groups, and the thing we'll focus on is geography, right? We're just going to focus on geography. We have groups according to identity. Yes, we've seen these guys before. We've seen this before. All right, so we're going to focus on geography with this. But I just wanted to connect it quickly to previous pieces. All right. So just purely geography. There's no other piece added to this. So we're going to have an SIR model with random mixing locally. That's fine, right? Maybe at the scale of a university, whatever it is, scale of a small town, or a scale of a school, or a scale of well, that's good. A workplace. Discrete time simulation, because we have computers. We'll have some infection probability. So it's going to be, we're taking the SIR model. We're just expanding in a couple of ways. We're going to have this recovery probability gamma. I think it might have been called R early on. And then we'll have this new piece, which is the probability that you get up and travel, right? And we need a piece to add to that. So the distance that you travel away is going to decay exponentially, right? So you might go to the next town. There's some lower probability that you go a little further. There's a very small probability you travel to the other side of the globe. So this is some typical travel distance, this C guy, which is fun to draw. All right, so that's the story. So all of these things are SIR, and we're just going to add this little piece. And then we need some kind of landscape to move around on. So instead of putting on a 2D lattice, which is an easy thing to do, this is why I was connecting back to these other models. This is the idea. So again, so there'll be here's your local group, whatever it is. You are interacting with people in a random way here. Now and then, there's some chance that you move out, right? This is a simple case with just a hierarchical kind of structure. I think with some of the airline data and all that sort of stuff, we can really probably do a good job of modeling the next thing. But it's one of these cases, once again, where it's not very useful to be in between these abstract models and the real thing, right? So it's like modeling. This is Schelling's point, which was someone else's point, but he made it nicely, or repeated it nicely, which is that if you're modeling a new jet, right, an airplane, you want to have the fluid flow around it and figure that out. It's not a good idea to deform from a sphere for which we have exact solutions. Well, you don't deform your way up to the thing. You go. It's hard to have that in between. Maybe you look at a wing and so on separately, but kind of got to look at the whole thing. All right, so the game's going to be somewhat similar. Instead of connections, which is what we did before to realize a network, we have the probability of travel now. So people will actually get up and move, and they'll go and sneeze on other people. Right? They'll be sneezing. I think that's good for this level. All right, so a couple of things that pop up naturally then. So instead of this an R naught, which will still matter, we'll have P naught. So this is the expected number of individuals that will leave a group, right? If it's infected, the expected number of ones that will leave with an infection. So we have to calculate. This is something we could compute. So they're dangerous, right? So the thing is spreading through this local context. It's just one place that's infected. It's spreading through it. Some of these people jump out. And quite reasonably now, you need this thing to be yeah, so you need this to be greater than 1 for the thing to really take off. So we're not thinking about R naught now. R naught is a local piece. It's wrapped in this P naught idea. But we need at least one person to be leaving for the thing to spread, right? So you infect this next place, and then it has to move on from there as well. So a couple of responses that you could have to an epidemic taking off. I mean, there's all sorts of things. So you could restrict the frequency of travel, shut down airlines, whatever it is, borders, and the range. So that's another thing. So you say, all right, you can travel, but just to the next town or whatever it is. So there are a couple of things you could do, and right, one of these may have more or less economic impact, for example. And aside from the efficacy in reducing the spread. So let's see what happens. So we're going to vary C. This is the final size, big variation. So we'll come to that later on. So there's big variation. Sometimes the thing doesn't take off. But this is varying the size that people can, the distance, the typical distance that people can move around in. So that C thing. Makes sense, right? So eventually there's some takeoff. Once you get above some characteristic size, people are moving. There's enough of these characters moving out of their individual, their initial locations with an infection, and they're able to get to other people. So that's reasonable, right? That's reasonable. So if no one moves very much, they stay at home, they get a chance to move, but they choose to move just locally, then nothing spreads. So we get that sort of thing. But we get this huge variation in the outcome. So we'll come to that again. So this is pretty sensible. There's also this. So this is the transition. So based on, so we see it, right? So here's 1 for P naught. So when the expected, so this, we're dialing up this probability of movement, and as a result, we're dialing up the probability that someone moves from a context and is infected. then we get this transition again. Now this is a logarithmic scale on this story, on the x-axis. So yes, it's very bad once you get to, say 3. 3 is about here, right? That's pretty bad. Interesting. 3 is an interesting number here. All right, so good. Both of those transitions make sense. So we had varying the distance of travel, varying the number of people that do travel as well, who are infected. That's also sensible. So you could say, I mean, these things are somewhat incommensurate, but you could say that there's a bigger effect with the distance that people travel, which makes some sense, right? So if you can pull that back down, you don't want this happening, right? Even if just a few people are moving, but there's a chance that they could move to the other side of the world, that's really a bad thing. So that's sort of an outcome that you could gently say from this study. So what about these flat distributions? So in fact, we get that kind of thing coming out. So you just have to add these ingredients, right? Now we're structuring the population the way it moves around. And this pops out. So instead of getting, all right, if we just had this one homogeneous population, people moving around, bumping into each other, then we'd have this bimodal distribution, right? Either it takes off or it messes up straight away and doesn't spread. A couple of very interesting things here. So this is a big number here, relatively. It's that same scale here. There's a lot of them that don't take off. When they do, it's very unpredictable, right? It's very unpredictable as to what can happen.
So on the last slide, what were the error bars?
Yeah, there's giant error bars. So that's what's happening on this next piece, right? So the point is that there is some average, but you get massive variation in the outcome, right? So once we've got either of these situations, right? So say in here the C is up to 0.6. It takes off on average. It's this, but there's a wild variation in possible outcomes. So that's best shown here. Yeah, yeah, shown here because we have all of these, right, possible results, and the same thing here. Now the interesting thing is this is for a case. So all that's changed between these two cases is that this is a much more infectious, this is a horrible disease, right? So on average 3 people, which is very bad, that's exponential growth. On average 3 people are being infected here by one infective locally. Here it's 12. It's just horrific, right? This is, Ebola. Or zombies, right? That's another good, zombies are pretty good. Well, the alien one. Alien really would be bad. Okay, Land in Times Square. Great. It's probably a movie about that. Yeah, they never do that. All right, so let's see. So they're a bit different, right? This has dropped now to 683, so there are a lot more that take off. But in terms of, if you look back and you've got one of these has been realized, right? One of these events has been realized. It's hard to say, from this story, it's hard to say that, well, it was really infectious, right? You can get this thing, it's much milder in terms of infectiousness, can reach all the way up to 3/4 of the population being infected. So that's the story. We get these flat distributions, right, for certain combinations of C and P, pretty broad regions of those variable distributions. We can get different R naughts producing very similar distributions, right? So that's not the big story here. It's about how people move around. And this is a paper from 2005. It was published in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. So it sat in there and connected into some of this work that people started to do on airlines. We're getting certainly this case that you could have the same, right? You see half the population got infected, half the population got infected. It's really much more the case, it seems, that the way we move around is the problem. Okay, this is, again, 30 hours went into, okay, crazy. So this is a disease outbreak on a night, so this is taking a population, everyone bounces and interacts with each other, all these ridiculous models. So this is the fraction infected over a function of time. It's disappearing because they're dying. There's this, that's done, right? It just takes, this is what happens in these simple disease models, like, whoa, right? Takes off. The cumulative number just goes boom. Very smooth, even on a network story here, which is what this is. If you look at what we get, this is just a couple of examples that come out of this model, where we've just added this kind of hierarchical structure. I mean, I shouldn't say just, but we've introduced this new multi-scale way of people moving around, right? We had the work by Longini with 2 scales. This is now many scales. It's probably 4 or 5, 6 layers in the hierarchy, I think. You see this resurgence story, right? So you think, oh, we're all right here, right? And someone lurches into another town and, bites someone, and it's all on again, right? And this one just went, and so these are exactly the same initial conditions, right? But zombies win, yeah.
What's the legend?
The legend. So this is number of the legend.
Yeah, like the tick marks. Like why is one look almost empty and one's like 2/3 full? Like what you have R0 equals 3 and then there's some like data marker thing.
This thing?
Yeah.
This is the final fraction infected. That's what that is.
Oh, I see.
This is like fraction zombies. Sorry, that little guy is, this is like a little, this would be a little gauge filling up, which you watch in real time and stroke your cat. Your cat is obviously the evil genius controlling you, but that's another twist at the end of the movie. So, so this is going on and on. Eventually, there's a couple little, they pop out, and then you really get them, and there's like, a few of you left, and hopefully you start the human race again. But this is, pretty bad. Pretty bad. Maybe Australia. New Zealand. New Zealand's the only place that survives. The plucky New Zealanders. All right. Right, so this is the same initial conditions, And again, nothing can take off. That happens quite a bit, right? So nothing takes off. But when it does, just adding this structure of people moving around immediately gives rise to that resurgence thing. So this is very problematic from we're watching this thing take off. I mentioned the other day that Toronto had exactly this thing happen to them. It looked like their cases went down. They're like, yes, come back and visit us. Spend your tourist dollars here. We are lovely and Canadian and friendly. And then it went thump up again. So, it's bad.
So why are these different?
Just randomness, yeah. It's just purely randomness, yeah. And of course we chose 2 random. No, I mean, it's not true. It's not true. We don't do that. But they are, it's just to give you a sense of it. So there are many, again, that take off, that don't take off. There's a whole bunch of those, right? That's back in this axis here. So again, it's R0 equals 3. So there are a ton that don't take off, yeah. But it's exactly the same thing, exactly the same disease. It's just that this person, got a little sick, and instead of going and talking to their friend, they just kind of turn on the TV and didn't spread it, right?
So the only difference is the seed, right? You're using a random number generator, one has a different seed than the other.
It's the seed. Well, so you have all of these all these little subpopulations. You infect one of them, inject with the zombie virus, right, just to see what would happen, and then you let it run. And so how they bump into each other, whether they move or not,
right.
That's everything that happens after that, right? I mean, you could seed the one called Fred every time.
Well, I mean,
You just run the mechanics.
Everything, maybe Fred decides to sleep in today.
Yeah, right. So it's all that stuff. Yeah. Yep. Fred. It was Fred. All right. All right, so vast differences. So of course, what we've done is we go from here to here. This is a world where everyone is interacting. This is one where now we're in little subpopulations and we can interact and move around. Yeah. So tremendously different and bad. So just be afraid, I think, is the upshot. Don't believe anyone, and yeah. All right. So that's the upshot. Be afraid. So let's see. So we have. It's a very simple kind of multi-scale population structure. It's hierarchical, which is a bit funny, but it's not a bad proxy for the way people move around today because of planes, right? It's very different. So we get these two things: resurgence and broad epidemic size distribution. So we pat ourselves on the back, and we're very happy about that. Okay. It's good. So a couple of conclusions for this. Then I have some we'll start connecting into social contagion. I will say that there's still a lot of naive models of disease spreading. You just have to be careful about, look at what people are really doing. People use this SIR model for 80 years, just over and over again in various ways, and it's just not it has this nice property. There's a beautiful number, R0. And your government wants an R0. Let's find out the R0 of this thing. We're going to measure it for you, and we have the number, and then, if you do that, here's the way to implement a policy that now makes that R0 less than 1. Then everyone is saved, right? Not good.
So this seems to be probably set up for Monte Carlo, maybe team like diffusion Monte Carlo or something. But has anybody tried to use Conway's game of life to talk about this kind of stuff?
For disease spreading?
Yeah.
Um,
All sorts of random crap.
Well,
Shapes and propagators and
so I guess you have to think about the mechanics. So there, in a sense, there's a lot of recovery, right? People are getting, if you imagine that they're little individuals who are sick or not, they're getting better, and so on. So I think you'd have to look. I'm not sure if there's a reasonable modeling of, right? Because these things are flicking on and off, and it's moving around.
I guess that's not really relevant too much.
However, there are some very weird models that are inspired by social contagion that give very odd, chaotic dynamics. They're a little bit moving away from the real problem. Inspired by, but not applicable to. In no way threatened by real data. So we just published one. Yeah, physical review letters, right? Yeah, it's my fault. Work I started in 2005. Oh my God. So let's see. So it's very unpredictable. I mean, we just changed this thing, and boom, we have this incredibly unpredictable system now. Really bad. We've certainly, made it. But SIR is still the heart of this thing. We haven't, added stuff like travel bans or something. None of those real things. We haven't put those things in. The way, the kinds of things ways people move around. That's, and that really is a job for Gleam and so on. These much more complicated things, the Vespignani's work. But it does show you at least that this is to stop talking about just one number, right? And you should stop talking about one number for probably most systems. People love it. I'm seeing it for transportation. You see it for weather. What's the travel situation like in the city right now? It's a 5. Put on a color scale, actually. That's even better, because no one knows what that means at all. It's a red. It's a chartreuse. Today is chartreuse, which means I should take a scooter. All right, I don't know. So it's not very informative about how likely, so it's kind of odd. So how likely the outcome will be, right? Even if you know R0, even if you know what, you get someone to sneeze on someone and you measure it, and then you get someone to sneeze on another person, and you get some, that's never really done. That's hard to do. And also completely unethical. People probably do it with mice. I'm sure they do. Let's see. So, and it doesn't tell you much about how likely, any future epidemic will be. It doesn't tell you much about the one you've observed. So, right, too much stuff is in here, right? Price of bananas. Everything is in there. We need more than one number, which I've said. Okay. Population structure is a big deal. These rare events, right? It looks like it's all gone, and then someone lurches into a new village and says hello, and that's bad. So, controlling the distance that people move is probably the thing to do. So, I think we're good. All right, that's good. I have more. I've probably said all these things. So you have to, and this is what's being done in these complicated models now. So you have to take out the way people travel from the, and the disease. You need more than one friend. So at least in our case, we have R0 greater than 1 and P0 greater than 1 being pieces that you need to have working for the thing to spread. And if you could look back on real epidemics, how important, what is N? That's still a hard problem, right? What is N? I mean, should we always make a model of the world? Probably. And I think that's really where we are now. I mean, it is the scale of the world, and someone has a, bit of a sneeze and a bit of a bit of a tickle in their throat and it doesn't go past their family. You know, you can run that all the time and it all makes sense. So you're still always operating at the scale of the world. Right? Okay, so let's connect into social contagion. Social contagion, good. Are we doing all right? Do we have more questions? Any tweets we want to compose? Done that? Okay.
So if you look at some of the more like malicious things, like some of these crazy filoviruses like Marburg or Ebola or something, they kill the host incredibly fast.
Yeah.
And it's real nasty. And then they just kind of hang out in some sort of dormant state, but they still have to have a host, right? And I mean, they're trying to figure this, so maybe they have to figure this out.
Yeah, it comes down to really getting at the disease itself, and that's you know, it's what you've got to do.
Do these models have any sort of like, I mean, it seems like you have it like it rises and then it falls, and then there's some time delay between when it resurges or something. Is there some way to account for the fact that like this like native host might move or do some, or does it always just go back to like, how does that work exactly here?
So there are so many ways you can move, but you know, it's this ratio of the infectiousness and the recovery rate. So what we did is just sort of sit that at a point and explore everything else, you know, vary the travel distance and so on. So it's really, there's just sort of one fixed example there. Right, R naught equals 3 and R naught equals 12. So we looked at a couple. But then you want to take what you could do is take R naught equals 3 and then vary the details of those things. So make it more infectious, but the recovery rate faster, or the removal rate, right? So that's going more towards Ebola or something, right? It's bad, but you're gone pretty quickly. So what happens with that? So that should mean, you know, keeping P fixed, the probability of movement fixed, that it burns out, right? That should come up in this model. I mean, in this
model, would it completely burn out and not come back though?
Yeah, so there's no sort of environmental reservoir, right? There's an exogenous, you know, we come in and say, you are sick, and let it run, right? So you'd have to have some, so yeah, again, more complicated modeling, right? Ebola, I'm not sure where Ebola lives in, but I mean, where does it kind of, you know, how does a person suddenly, oh, I have now I have Ebola? Because they ate, okay, they ate bats or something? All right, so there is this reservoir it's benign within or something like that, yeah. Yeah, some of these diseases have, some person has done some very bad things and some, you know, to get it in the first place, all right? But I guess you know those stories, all right? I guess bat soup is sort of, you know, not that bad. But anyway, okay, so you know, it's within a reasonable realm of human behavior. Not good for bats. All right, so let's see. So people have taken SIR and said, well, this is going to apply to everything, right? And as we've sort of shown, it doesn't apply by itself for real diseases, but it does locally. It's pretty good. So you go back to, so there's a paper in Nature, 1964. It's it's an interesting one to look up. I should have a link to that, actually. So, but this is adoptions of ideas and belief. And I said, well, we have this thing for disease spreading, so let's do it for religion. Yay. And they just write about it. And they just kind of write about it. We have people talking about spread of rumors. It's very simple, just sort of thought stories, you know, really. I don't think these would get published in Nature anymore. This has been very, very influential in marketing and in the science of marketing, right? So you have people in business schools thinking about this model really up until the last few years. And it's the so-called BAS model. And it's this model, actually. It's SI. So we'll see some more SI, but you're susceptible and you're infected. And if you look at this paper, you don't have a television, you do have a television, right? So there's a lot of, that's what was being looked at. There's generally a lot of kind of, you know, so-called white goods, you know, so people didn't have refrigerators and then they started to have refrigerators, TV and all these things. And so in all of these kind of growth models, you have this kind of thing, right? Sigmoid curves appear all the time. And there are a bazillion different models that can fit a sigmoid curve. Right? I mean, this is how people grow. There's all sorts of things grow like this. So this is, you know, some sort of size measure, which could be the fraction of households that have TVs, the fraction of whatever. All right. That's been influential even, I mean, probably still is in some areas. Again, that sort of gets around this whole problem of n. Right? It just doesn't quite say, well, what's TV is taking off. How do you have any sense of what's the sort of scale that it possibly could reach? So you see, it's really after the fact. You see something spread and you're like, oh yeah, well that was infectious. Like, it's right, there's no, and you can model it. You have your model, you put your model out, okay. Things like this, spread of fanatical behavior, 2003. So, it's a very topical point, right? So you have, again, these kind of classes. You have people who are susceptible, they become exposed, and eventually they become, fanatical, right? So there's sort of this complicated model of them moving through compartments, interacting with each other. So it's an S something, 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 F something. I don't know if there's refracted. It's probably removed after fanatical. Yeah, right. Okay. All sorts of fun. Spread of Feynman diagrams, right? So people have used this in a lot of different areas. And so this kind of model will work well for this, for sure. But it's not really predictive, and it's not, That's what everyone wants, right? So half of advertising's money is wasted is sort of the famous statement that no one really knows who originally said it, but the problem is no one knows which half it is, right? That's the great problem. It's probably more than that, but you couldn't say which half. Yeah, wouldn't be funny. All right, so so I'm just saying that people have just boldly walked out and said, well, SIR applies to religion and things like that. That's a little strong. So we'll see social contagion can take on many, many more kinds of behaviors. I mean, there are lots of different diseases and horrible things, but generally speaking, we have an idea that once you get exposed to a little bit, you get an immune response if things work okay. So there's a memory for diseases that fights against you getting it. Whereas, and that can happen in social phenomena, but the opposite can happen as well, right? You're exposed to this product or this behavior or this thing or this word that's being used, and then you hear it again from a week later, but from a different source, and so on and so on. And then eventually you can become infected. So you can become more susceptible through exposure. So that's a very different thing. It's possible for some diseases that that's true, that you are building up a, so this is not a disease, but allergies work like that, right? Like bee allergies, for example, so that you get to a point where you're in trouble. If you get another bee sting, you cross a threshold. So your body's very much remembering it, right? You're at a tipping point. Okay, I always like to put this one up. This is kind of fun. There are a couple more things that I usually show. So this is predicting social catastrophe, right? Things exploding. This is for the economist in the room. I mean, let's be honest. Physicists have been idiots for thousands of years, right? With that whole, missing the ellipse story for, that, right? Okay, so it's okay. This is much harder. It's much harder. So let's see. So I should put in that XKCD. Yes. Damn it. Forgot it. Pen. Can someone please hand me a squeaking weasel or a pen? Thank you very much. Yes. Thank you. I've destroyed everything. All right. So this is in 2008. So this is things kind of went wrong, right? You guys, I don't know what happened to you, but bad things happen to everyone. So you have this story. This is taken from the New York Times. So too much faith in the self-correcting power, right? Those of us who looked to the self-interest of lending institutions to protect shareholders' equity, myself included, are in a state of shocked disbelief. Do you feel that your ideology pushed you to make decisions you wish you had not made? Well, yes, I found a flaw. I don't know how significant or permanent it is, but I've been very distressed by that fact. So there's this, it's hard to predict what the hell's going on in social. We've talked about predicting these diseases, pretty bad. Social phenomena, now we're getting to psychohistory, right? This is Asimov's idea of things. But this is actually a year before that, in the year before, 2007. This is an interesting statements from Greenspan back then. And I'd like to trot these out for your enjoyment. So I've been dealing with these mathematical models of forecasting the economy, big ones. If I could figure out a way to determine whether or not people are more fearful or changing more euphoric, which is a bit of a strong statement. I don't need any of this other stuff. I could forecast the economy better than any way I know how. So I don't know if that's true. But of course, money is belief, right? Money is inherently belief. Credit, I mean, it is something. It's a shared psychosis that we have that money means something, right? So when we start to, go to banks and pull it all out, it's because we've started to change our belief about the thing. So it's a very social, aspect. Anyway, but he's talking about these other pieces of social behavior or psychological behavior. So the trouble is we can't figure that out. I've been doing this for 50 years. I'm no better than I ever was, and nobody else is. Forecasting 50 years ago, this is pretty bad, right? He's kind of on a downer. It's no good as, it's no better than it was 50 years ago. And then he has this, and the reason is human nature hasn't changed. We can't improve ourselves. This is kind of, dude, needs a hug. So this is actually on the Jon Stewart show, and you can link to it here. It was a very interesting discussion in general, and of course his rather learned response was this. It got beeped, obviously. But it was a, funny thing. All right, so lots of stuff about the Fed and how that's a big parameter, right? The big knob that you tune to make things go up or down, and when your knob is tuned all the way down to 0, it's hard to kind of do anything else. You might need a lever next to it, right? 2 levers would be good. I don't know. Or no levers, right? No levers, then it'll be all okay. I don't know, it's craziness. So this is also around that time, so we have Galbraith. There are at least, this is what I'm really having a go to, 15,000 professional economists in the country, and you're saying 2 or 3 of them foresaw the mortgage crisis. Now, of course, people have all sorts of stories after things happen as to how they knew everyone else was a fool and knew all about it. Well, it says 10 or 12, would be closer than 2 or 3. And what does it say about the field of economics, which claims to be a science? It's an enormous blot on the reputation of the profession. There are thousands of economists, most of them teach, and most of them teach a theoretical framework that has been shown to be fundamentally useless. I'm sorry. So it's hard. It's really hard. It's really hard. And there's been, in economics, there's been a desperation to have that kind of physics-like certainty. You have theorems and proofs and all those good things, and you use LaTeX, and that's what they do, right? Exactly. If you're using LaTeX, it must be right, So that's a bit of a problem. Okay, so we're not going to be able to predict these things, but I'm going to tell you a little more about social contagion, simple models at least. And we can start that off. Okay. We're doing okay? Not too much. Got a little rough there, sorry. All right, so social contagion. All right, social contagion. So we have some nice things here to think about. Again, it'll be simple toy models. This is a very hard area to get data on. We have started to get more data on the last 5 or 6 years. The advent of Twitter has been a good thing. Facebook, of course, but just other online aspects that or traces of people have allowed us to get to kind of that big data story. It's not everything, but we're getting it right. I always put these guys in. Okay, the evil seal. All right. Lammy is such a benign character. Okay, so let's see. Thanks for the reminder. That's good. Okay. Tweets. My God. All right, things that spread well. Okay, so this is disappointing. This is BuzzFeed, right? So Jonah Peretti, who went through the MIT Media Lab, started off this. He's also one of the co-founders of Huffington Post, I think, actually. But BuzzFeed, right, they're trying to get people to come in and look at things, and they ended up with these 8 categories of what people tend to share, right? So we share jokes, we share funny things. What are the things that really, really spread? And so news also spreads, right? That's a big deal. There's a new pope, you tell everyone, but a lot of people know it already, but it's something that people will communicate. But there are these categories, right? So there's cute and geeky, trashy, fail, WTF. So that's the way BuzzFeed works, actually. It has these 8 ridiculous things that people like to kind of comment on and share. And then it actually has news. Right? So Peretti's, I guess I kind of stuck this down. So this is a nice compilation of these guys, right? Yeah, we have a hedgehog that's hurt itself. But it's a lol, it's a cute, it's a fail. So that's their 404. what I want to say about Peretti is that his thing with the contagion of news and stories, and this I can finish, I guess, with this, is that so years ago, Nike would allow you to put you buy some shoes online, and you put in anything you want, and they'll print it on the shoe, right? That was the idea. So it was a fun thing. This was maybe, I think, in the late 90s. The internet is this thing, and right. So he put in a sweatshop, right? Sweatshop purchase, and then he got a letter, this kind of form letter back, very lawyer type thing. It said, no, words, no. There are some subset, like we don't, it's not a profanity. So he writes back to them. They write back to him, and he has this long kind of thing, which he eventually, and then more and more amusing kind of lawyer speak, trying to get out of it. So he puts it all in one big email and then sends it off to a couple of friends, right? And thinks, this is kind of funny, And so it spreads all over the world, right? So it spreads all over the world, and he gets all sorts of feedback, and he traces it a little bit as to where it goes, right? People from aircraft carriers. I mean, it's true. When something really spreads, eventually, and everyone's writing to you about it, eventually you'll hear from Antarctica and probably an aircraft carrier in the somewhere in some unknown place. Then it's really spreading. So it was a bit like going to the lottery, I think, or a casino and pulling the first one, and then all the things pile out. That's the worst thing that can ever happen to you in some ways, right? Well, especially at casinos, because then you think you're magic, right? They're watching, so they know. But it was an interesting discussion that kind of went on for a few years about whether you could, how much you could do this. I mean, obviously, this is sort of if you could make things spread at will, and you're a magician. So it turned out to be kind of hard, but it manifested many years later in this BuzzFeed thing, and sort of distilled it down to these categories of things that spread. They had these contagious media competitions, all sorts of things. A few other sites that took off. His sister actually writes, she's a stand-up comedian, and she writes some of the Parks and Recreation shows. So, they're funny people. Anyway, there's the whole lolcats thing, so that spreads, that's good. Okay, so some things really stick. So tattoos are, so of course here we have religion plus a tattoo. I mean, this is kind of impressive, right? So you're signaling to other people. Of course, clothes are a good way to spread things. These are hard to take off, which is an interesting fashion issue. This is good. I like this thing. So lots of things spread. So we'll come. I'll just give you the start of this. But one of the big deals is this: that we right. Look at these people, glassy-eyed automatons going about their daily lives, never stopping to look around and think. I'm the only conscious human in a world of sheep. So what I'm going to say is that we do copy each other tremendously, right? We have language that we share all the time with all sorts of characteristics that we copy without. We're very oblivious to context, and we're incredible imitators. So that's going to be kind of the essence of these models that we'll look at. This is where I'll finish today, I think. So this is Duncan Watts's feet. And so my former colleague at Columbia. And so Puma shoes took off around about 2000. They were they're gone, they disappeared. And then suddenly everyone was wearing Puma shoes, those hipster type characters, right? And so, but they were everywhere. And Puma responded majestically by producing every model they'd ever made. And it's just suddenly they were cool. It must have been I don't know, it just took off, but they were everywhere. So eventually a friend of his forced him to buy a pair. And as he said, that was kind of the end of it. But I remember seeing them on him and thinking, and just saying, this is hilarious. You've fallen prey to the copying of things. Said he was forced. That was the end of the contagion. All right, so I'll come back to this kind of imitation-based contagion on Thursday. But that is a good place to start. All right.